Garcia, and I'm going to be presenting the nervous system as well as some of the histology involved with the nervous system. So first I'm going to be going over the meninges. So for this brain, you can see here that this part here is the dura mater, and part of the dura mater here is the superior sagittal sinus. So when we peeled off the dura mater from the brain, you can see this area right here, which would be superior sagittal sinus. And although you can't really see it after you peeled off the dura mater, you could kind of see right here the acronoid matter, that when you slightly peeled off part of it, you could see some of these little like spikes here. That's the acronoid matter. Okay, so the cerebrum is all of this that we see right here is the cerebrum, as you can see here. And the longitudinal fissure would be this part that splits basically the brain in half right here. The lobes splits both of the lobes. And then the cerebral hemisphere would be, this is one hemisphere and this is another one. So just like the lobes split like this vertically is what the cerebral hemispheres are. And then we know that our frontal lobe would be right here in the front. And our parietal lobes would be right here. And then our temporal lobe would be right here on the side where like our ears would be. Then our scapula would be right here in the back. And then the central sulcus is what splits the frontal and parietal lobe in those sections. So for here, we could say that it would be around here is what we would see, kind of like the separation of the frontal and parietal lobe. So that would be like our central sulcus. Okay, and then the cerebellum is, so how I mentioned before, the cerebrum was this area right here. So the cerebellum is right here, this section. And then you also have to know that in the cerebellum there is the arbor vitae. So you could see the structure that looks like a tree. Arbor means tree, or in Spanish, if you know Spanish, árbol also means tree. So that's one way to remember that. And then this section right here is the brainstem. So here, this right here is our brainstem, and our brainstem is made up of 4 parts. And so this area just right here would be our midbrain. Let me redo that. So this right here would be our midbrain, kind of that little section. On here on the human model, you could see it'd be right here. That would be our midbrain. And then our corpora quadrigemina would be right here. So on the human model, it's a bit easier to see. It would be this little section right here. And as for on the sheep brain, it would be around this area right here, where our corpora quadrigemina would be. And then we know that pons is like, looks like a beer belly. So the pons would be this section right here that like sticks out, and that protrudes out a bit. That would be our pons. And then our medulla oblongata would be this section right here. This would be our medulla oblongata on both of these brains, as you can see. So that is what makes up our cerebellum and brainstem. Okay, next. So these structures are associated with the cranial nerves. One of the cranial nerves that we had learned was the optic nerve. The optic nerve, you can't see it, unfortunately, on this sagittal section or on this brain, but you can see it on this coronal section. In this coronal section, what you see right here, what I'm outlining, that is the optic nerve. So you can see it right there. That's what it would look like. Our olfactory bulbs is this part right here. You can see the bulbs right here. You can see them even better on this brain. So that would be our olfactory bulbs. And then the optic chiasma is this little section that you see right here. This is our optic chiasma, and then if you were to look at it at the sagittal section, it'd be this little tiny piece that's right there. But yeah, that's what the optic chiasma looks. Usually it's like in an X, but it looks like some of it was slightly teared, so you can't see it as clearly, but that would be the optic chiasma. Okay, so for some of our brain structures that we still have left, we have our corpus callosum. So in the sagittal view on the sheep brain, the corpus callosum would be this section right here is our corpus callosum, and on this human model, there's also a sagittal section. You can see it right here. This is our corpus callosum, and if you were looking at a coronal section, our corpus callosum would essentially be this. It'd be like that little white area as we saw. So it would be this area, like this white sections, would be our corpus callosum. The choroid plexus, you can't really, you would see it in the sagittal section of the sheep brain, but you can't really see it in this brain. But on the human model, you can see it right here. You see how you see this pink line? This line right here is what would be our choroid plexus right there. Be like this area right there. And then right underneath that choroid plexus is where our pineal gland would be. So you can see that pineal gland is right there. And then it appears that for the sheep brain, our pineal gland would be around here. And then our thalamus, so our thalamus is this white section that you could see right here. This is the thalamus on the sheep brain on the sagittal section, and on the coronal section, our thalamus would be essentially this area right here. And on the human model, it would be this section right here would be our thalamus. On the human model, and then our hypothalamus would be right underneath it. So the hypothalamus would be this section right here on the human model, and then on the sheep for sagittal it would be right here. And then on the coronal section you can't see the hypothalamus, so you wouldn't look for it there. And then for the pituitary gland, on the human model you can't really see it that well, but it seems like it would be right here around this area since it's right beneath the hypothalamus. On this sagittal for the sheep brain, you can't see it as well. You can't see it on this one. But on this coronal section you can see it, but it would look something like this if you were to see in the sagittal section just split in half. So this is the pituitary gland. So if you were to see it on sagittal section, it would essentially look like this, just split in half. And since this is the optic chiasma, the pituitary gland would have to be somewhere around like this region is where the pituitary gland would have to be, because here's like the thalamus and is the hypothalamus, and then right underneath the hypothalamus is our pituitary gland. But yeah, you can't see it on this specific sheep brain, but it would be around this region. Okay, so next we're going to be getting into the ventricles. So the lateral ventricle, the lateral ventricles is in between the corpus callosum, so it would be inside here for sagittal section, and for the coronal section it would be right here. And if you want it to be able to all like outline, So it'd be like inside here is where our lateral ventricle would be. And then our third ventricle for our coronal section would be right here, right underneath this area. You can kind of see this little hole. It would be right there, our third ventricle. And as for sagittal section, the third ventricle would be right around this section as well, is where our third ventricle would be. And I'm gonna outline that for you. So our third ventricle would be around here. And then our cerebral aqueduct. So you can't see it on the coronal section, but on the sagittal section you can see it. It would be around this area right here is where you would see it. If you were to pull the cerebellum back a bit, you would be able to see the gap here. You'd see the cerebral aqueduct. So you would see like a gap that would go along here. And then between that gap is also where you would find the fourth ventricle. So the fourth ventricle would be right around here is where we would find the fourth ventricle. Fourth ventricle would be right around here. And then the fourth ventricle would be right around here. Would be right around there. And then for our blood vessels that are associated with the brain, we have the circle of Willis. So the circle of Willis is this section right here. You can see how it's a circle right around here. That's the circle of Willis. And then we have our vertebral arteries, which our vertebral arteries are located just right there. A vertebral artery is right here, this section and this section. So you can see how the circle of Willis, it goes down like that. That's where our vertebral arteries are. And then the common arteries, common carotid arteries, are also part of the circle of Willis. You can see how it branches out, but more onto the outer sides, and the vertebral arteries are more inner, as you can see. And then our interjugular vein, you can see that our internal jugular vein would be here, more like outer side. So it's on, as you can see right here. And then our superior sagittal sinus is essentially what you see right here on the brain. So this would be like our dura mater, and you can see how the superior sagittal vein runs right here along. Okay, so this is the circle of Willis, but we're breaking it down to better understand and identify the other arteries that are involved with the nervous system. So when you look at the human model, it's going to look like this. You can see how the circle of Willis is right here. It's basically, this is the circle of Willis. You can see how it's a circular shape. But you can also see the rest of the arteries that are associated. So the ones up here are the anterior cerebral arteries. So the anterior cerebral arteries, as you can see in the human model, would be right above here. And then the anterior communicating artery would be just right below it. It would be this little section right here is where you see the anterior communicating arteries. And then the middle cerebral artery would be these ones that branch out here to the side, which makes sense because it's like in the middle of the circle of Willis. So middle cerebral artery. And then we have the posterior communicating artery. So since the anterior was here, it makes sense that posterior would be right here. So that would be our posterior cerebral artery that we just circled right there. And then right below it, since we also had an anterior cerebral artery, it makes sense that we have a posterior cerebral artery. So these two that branch out just like the ones above, are also cerebral artery, but these are the posterior. And then right in this section right here, we have the basilar artery, which you can see like you can't see it as well in this human model from the angle of this picture, but you can see that this one has like 4 little strands out on the side, so that's one way you can identify the basilar artery. And then how we saw in the previous slide, it extends into the vertebral arteries. And then here we have the spinal cord. So for this histology, the gray matter would be this section that's right here that you see. So this is the gray matter. And then our white matter is all of this that is not part of the gray matter. So it would be all of this would be our white matter. And then our anterior ventral horns. So anterior ventral horns would be just right here. So this is the anterior. This would be our anterior ventral horns. And then our posterior dorsal horns would be right here. So you can see that the anterior horns are a lot larger than the posterior horns, so that's one way to remember it. Also, you notice on the posterior side, you see these large roots. So that's one way to also remember. You see that the roots are right here on the posterior side, and the anterior sides, you don't see the roots are large. And then here we have our central canal right here in the middle. This little circle right there is our central canal. And then our anterior ventral root is this section right here. This would be our anterior ventral root. So out of these two, the one that looks thinner is your anterior root, and then your posterior root is the one right above. So this really long one that we see right here is your posterior dorsal root, and the posterior dorsal root is the one that has the ganglion. So that's where you see this thicker structure right here. So that's the posterior root ganglion. So remember that the posterior root has a ganglion, and you see it has a thicker structure and it's long. It leads all the way up here to the posterior dorsal horn, which makes sense. And then our spinal nerve would be this section that essentially comes together right here. So these would be our spinal nerves. Okay, and then next here we are going to be looking over the nerves. So there's 2 different ways you can look at the section of a nerve. Underneath the microscope, you can see it in a lower magnification and in a higher magnification. So like the red lens, you would be able to see here the epineurium, which is this outer layer that we see that goes around. And this other section that is inside that is the perineurium, which the perineurium is going to go around. And then you see this makes up the fascicles. And then within those fascicles, we have the endoneurium. So these ones right here are the endoneurium. And then if we were to zoom in with a higher lens, have a higher magnification, then you would be able to see myelinated and unmyelinated axons. So myelinated axons are going to be wrapped around with white. So that's how you're going to be able to tell that this is a myelinated axon. And then when you look at the unmyelinated axon, you see essentially this like very dark cell right here that's not surrounded by anything white, so that's how you know you're looking at unmyelinated axon. And then we have here the cerebral cortex gray and white matter. So the gray matter is going to be stained with the Golgi stain. So it's going to have this yellowish hue. So that's how you're going to know you're looking at the gray matter. Opposed to the white matter, it's going to have this white and very dark lining. As you can see, all these black lines are the axons. So you're going to see a lot of axons. And you can't really see the cell bodies. So that's how you know you're looking at white matter. But back to the gray matter. The cell bodies are these areas, as you can see, where it's pointing out, where you see this darker orange or brownish hue that pops out that are round. These are our cell bodies, and then our axons are also these black lines. So this is our eye. So for the eye, we have our cornea right here that goes around here, and then we have the iris, and then between the iris you can see the pupil right here, this space. And then we would have our ciliary bodies, which right here you can see these little lines here on each side. These are our ciliary bodies. Then this large circle here would be our lens. And then for the eye, if we're looking at higher magnification, then you'd be able to see other areas like this right here is our sclera, this thick layer right here. And then this darker line is the choroid. And then behind the choroid, we have our retina. And we're looking at a higher magnification. You can see these blood vessels inside of the choroid. And then right behind the choroid, you'd be able to see the photoreceptor layer, which you'd be able to see some of the rods and cones that are in the eye. And then our photoreceptor layer is that thin line. And our pigmented layer is going to be right here, and then our neuronal layer is these three sections. So you can see here is our photoreceptor layer, there's just a thin black line. Then right behind it we have pigmented layer, and then these three sections are going to be our neuronal layer. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you for listening.